This year, the ABC has been defined by editorial blunders, devastating legal losses, and perhaps worst of all, the arrogance of leadership, which underpins the body's refusal to change.
In a landmark legal defeat for the ABC, journalist Antoinette Lattouf has won her unlawful dismissal case.
I think people like Mr Rogan prey on people's vulnerabilities. They prey on fear.
Passed Sarah in the corridor, and she turned around and basically came back to me and said, in a very robust way, I have to say, Shari, please stop attacking my journalism. I did have to ask her to stop putting her finger in my face. She was pointing fairly aggressively at me at one point.
The organisation has become systemically hostile to conservative views and has emboldened its presenters and reporters to the point where they can make appalling, disparaging comments with no basis and get away with it.
This was an important moment for the Liberal Party to say, do we want to be a party that has rhetoric that's based in hate and exclusion, which is what these comments from Jacinta Nampijinpa-Price were. They were discriminatory, they were racist. I think it shows that she is a relatively inexperienced politician who sort of has one mode, that she's able to go in and destroy an idea, which we saw very much with the Voice referendum. But when it comes to selling a vision or talking about complicated or nuanced policy areas, she's not really able to do that yet.
We all know that in live television, mistakes happen and judgment cannot always be perfect. But that was a shocker. Higgins was stating as a fact that Indigenous Senator Jacinta Nampijinpa-Price was not capable of complex thought. Her evidence was that Price took positions the reporter didn't like. It is just another example of how captured these journalists are to groupthink and how deep the brain rot has infected their ability to think. The ABC's new managing director, Hugh Marks, has an opportunity to condemn these comments in Senate estimates, but instead, this happened.
Apart from calling Senator Nampijinpa-Price racist, effectively, I find these comments so disgusting because they're so denigrating of another senator. I'm sorry, Mr Marks, that's disgusting.
I think what Ms Higgins was referring to in that story was the nature of the comments that were made by Senator Nampijinpa-Price, and she was constructing a view on the comments made, not the person. Senator Nampijinpa-Price obviously reflected on those comments and wanted to clarify them, and I think it was open to Ms Higgins to draw the conclusion that she did about the particular comments.
Well, if Hugh Marks cannot concede that Higgins' comments were false, incredibly biased, and had no place in news reporting, then he is not fit to do this job. And there are countless examples like that. Joining me to carefully break down the significance of this year for the ABC is my colleague and the original host of this show, Chris Kenny. Thank you for joining us on the desk.
It's great to be here, Jack.
Well, you certainly kicked the hornet's nest this year, so to speak, when you drew the comparison between the ABC's editing, the coverage of the Donald Trump Jan 6 saga, with what the BBC did, splicing the content together in what I think was a very intentional effort to make it seem like Donald Trump was trying to get people to be violent and he was getting everyone to march down and be aggressive. And they did that in a very bad faith take. Let's have a listen to what the ABC actually did.
And after this, we're going to walk down and I'll be there with you, because you'll never take back our country with weakness. You have to show strength and you have to be strong.
So that was missing a fair bit of context.
Yeah, they did exactly what the BBC did here. Now, as you know, the BBC chair and their director of news resigned after a lot of issues, but the key one was the way they doctored or had dodgy edits from that Trump speech on that day, trying to make it look like Trump was actually urging people to be violent as they were later at Capitol Hill. And what the BBC had done, had cut out the real context of what Donald Trump had said. He told people to go peacefully down to the Capitol, and he told them to go down there and applaud the senators who were supporting Donald Trump. He didn't tell them to be violent, but they made it look like that with their dodgy edit. Now, when I saw that unfold in the UK, my instincts just told me, the ABC would have done the same thing. They share the same political bias. They share the same Trump derangement syndrome. So I went back to a Sarah Ferguson Four Corners report.
I bet it took you 30 seconds to find that.
It took me about half an hour. It's all there on iView. Thanks to taxpayers, you can get it all online. And sure enough, the same speech, a very similar edit. I don't think quite as egregious as the BBC's because they didn't go to a fight grab. But again, the ABC had cut out the bit where Donald Trump specifically said what he wanted people to do. That is, go down peacefully to the Capitol and just applaud the people supporting me. And they cut it to another grab where he's talking about strength. So they're trying to make this case and that Trump actually urged the violence, that Trump was responsible for the violence. Now, Sarah Ferguson, I know, has told people, in fact, in the haranguing of Sarah Henderson in the corridors of Parliament House, I believe
Incredible.
She's just sort of screaming about how Trump is responsible, Trump is culpable. So the problem here is now, her defence of this was that I had been critical of Donald Trump in a newspaper column about the same time. And this kind of proves my point. I was critical of Donald Trump. I did say publicly that he should have done more to prevent the violence, that he did fire up his supporters. But I didn't clip up and misrepresent what he said.
You didn't alter reality.
Yeah, exactly, to fit my case.
To suit your prejudice. And that's the thing. I'm also quite critical of a lot of things that Donald Trump does.
It doesn't give you the right to have
change
dodgy edits.
reality.
Exactly.
And that's
to
where
lie
you lose
effectively.
faith. And we're paying for it as well.
We're paying for it, and it's lying to their audiences.
There's another element to this, and I want to play a grab of Sarah Ferguson in this same documentary, because I think it really shows how they've gone about making the documentary and through how they look at Donald Trump. Let's have a listen.
If there's one thing that President Trump demonstrated in his final terrifying days in office, it's that these divided states remain vulnerable to an unscrupulous demagogue. Tonight, how a defeated, disgraced, and now twice impeached president brought US democracy to the brink of destruction.
So, an unscrupulous demagogue. This isn't an opinion piece. This is badged up as a news documentary, and you've got the reporter who is standing up there saying that he is an unscrupulous demagogue. Now, some people might share that view, but it's not an objective fact.
It's extraordinary. The Trump derangement syndrome and the deception and misleading of audiences over Donald Trump at the ABC has reached extraordinary levels. In that same piece, she talked about the propensity of civil war in the US. Now, we all know there has been a civil war in the US back in the 19th century, but so to invoke that now is reckless and dishonest and obviously misleading. And it's not the first time for Sarah Ferguson. She just, time after time, of course, we know she put a 3-part series together at massive expense to taxpayers, probably cost over $1 million, a 3-part series on Four Corners, run in 2018, that says Trump was installed into the White House by Vladimir Putin. That absolutely insane conspiracy theory at the time, debunked, disproven numerous times by all sorts of judicial and congressional inquiries since, yet it's still there on the ABC website. They haven't apologised for it. They haven't admitted their own error. This is our tax dollars pumping out dross about some Russia-America conspiracy theory.
As if he's some sort of Manchurian candidate.
Well, yeah.
And I think their evidence as well. It was a DNC dossier which was alleging all of this misinformation. They don't, when it starts to fall apart at the seams, and I think it's fair enough to publish the original allegations in a measured way. But when the story starts falling apart, you have to do it as robustly. You have to correct the record.
Well, if the Democrats are making these claims, of course, as a news reporter, you need to report them. But you have to measure them against the fact. You don't want to. You don't want to be out there making their case for them in spite of the facts, which is what the ABC has done.
They think
and then,
it's
as
their
you
job.
say, when it's all exposed to be a pile of nonsense, they don't correct it and they haven't apologised. It's really dangerous. And look, this sort of bias comes out in numerous policy areas: climate change, energy, Indigenous affairs, as you've touched on already. But when it comes to Donald Trump, it reaches almost manic levels. And we've seen that same derangement syndrome in the BBC as we see in the ABC. And Sarah Ferguson, I've got to say, she's got it bad, right? A lot of them have got it bad, but we see from her reporting all the time, she's just obsessed with Trump, can't see the facts for the rhetoric and the political partisanship.
Well,
the ABC should base, and she hosts their #1 television current affairs program, so it's a bit difficult, but they really should not allow her to report on anything in the US.
Exactly. And on that point, she isn't the editor-in-chief, and there should be checks and balances. And at the ABC, it appears to be that these reporters reach a certain level of seniority, and then they're given an independence to basically do whatever they want. And the Isabella Higgins thing, Hugh Marks was saying, well, she's formed her own view and everything, as if you've been there long enough, you can now be an opinion.
So let's get this right. An ABC reporter, news reporter, not an opinion host like you and I might be here, but a news reporter on the taxpayer-funded broadcaster, branding a senior Liberal senator as racist and dumb, effectively. And this person happens to be an Indigenous woman.
And Hugh Marks defends
and he defends
as a
her.
fact.
It is just extraordinary, and it's a sort of behaviour that the ABC would not tolerate in commercial media, yet here they are doing it in breach of their own charter, in breach of their own editorial guidelines, and it's an abuse of our taxpayers' dollars.
Yeah, now let's talk about some of these leaders and the arrogance that I alluded to in the beginning of this show. Justin Stevens, he's their news boss. He's paid a lot of money, more than $500,000. He's been given a lot more money in the last 12 months. And his job is to make sure that the news content is accurate, impartial. It rests on him as much as it does with Hugh Marks. This is his briefing. When you've pointed all of this stuff out, when you've gone on your show and you've done, I thought it was a very reasonable, very fair assessment of where they've cut, what impression it might have left when we're talking about the ABC edits, he wrote a letter to your boss to try and get you to back off. And I think we've got some coverage of it that we can bring up on the screen to have a look at it. But essentially, he wrote a letter to our boss, Paul Whitaker, to Michael Miller, to Michelle Gunn at The Australian, making the case that you were being unreasonable. And he made errors in it. He's not across his brief. When you're taking on content which is nuanced, it is difficult to do. What goes through your head when they write a letter like that?
Well, I think I'm getting under their skin, #1, but I think they're just missing the point. They should be addressing their journalism, not attacking their critics, and they should be addressing the facts I've put on the table, not complaining about me pointing them out. The thing that I do, and I take this very seriously, if I'm going to criticise journalists, and we do have a role, the taxpayers fund the ABC, so they have to be accountable. If I'm going to criticise their journalism, then I want to put all the facts on the table. And look, sometimes it makes for slow television, but I want to show them the whole grab and then how the ABC cut it, so that people can make up their own minds, so that our viewers can make up their own minds. And that's what I've done in these instances. Here's everything that Donald Trump said on this, and here's what the ABC put out. So they can't complain about it. I'm allowing people to make up their own minds. And they do the opposite, of course. They just pick and choose what they want to run to give a false impression, and they never expose the reality to their audiences.
Exactly. And the issue with the Avi Yemeni coverage as well is you pointing out that their Middle Eastern coverage has been bad, and Avi Yemeni goes off and he does a very robust doorstop. And then they're complaining that you cover the news event.
Well, yeah, Avi Yemeni from Rebel News fronted up Matthew Doran in Hostages Square in Jerusalem around the time the last of the hostages were being freed. And Yemeni was very aggressive in his questioning, but I think they were fair questions about the ABC's coverage, which I think has been terribly biased, terribly anti-Israel, very much pro-Palestine and even pro-Hamas. They've been running effectively Hamas propaganda without declaring it as such. And I express some sympathy for Matthew Doran because he's not the only person at the ABC. He's just one of the guys on the front line doing a difficult job. But a lot of his stuff has been biased, but a lot of the stuff produced in Australia and by others and fed down the line to him has been biased. So I thought it was a bit unfair for him to bear the brunt. But they've got to be able to respond faithfully about their own journalism. If he believes his journalism is fair and accurate, then you should be prepared to answer some questions about it. But instead, he ran away. He didn't like the questioning, fair enough. But the ABC management back in Australia, all they did was condemn Yemeni, but also condemn me for showing this.
For daring talking about Yemeni.
I'm supposed to censor this event because it criticised the ABC. It is just extraordinary. And it comes back to this idea of transparency and accountability.
And arrogance and the defensive attitude.
Well, that's the other. Let's start, though, with accountability and transparency. That surely should be at the core of the ABC's mission. Anyone involved in news journalism should be in favour of accountability and transparency, so they need to accept some themselves. But then, as you say, when you try and show some accountability or call them to account, they go to this arrogance. They think they are above reproach, above questioning, which is nonsense.
I think the only motive for writing a letter calling out saying he spoke about others, the only motive is to try and get someone sacked or to get them to stop talking in a way that you don't like.
Well, I should point out, one of the great things about working for this organisation is my bosses very quickly just told me they back me to do my job and do it well.
That's brilliant. Now, Sarah Ferguson has been, I think, at the centre of a lot of these scandals. One thing that keeps coming up is her interview style. And we've got the infamous moment that she interrupted Susan Lee God knows how many times. Let's have a listen.
Susan Lee, welcome.
Terrific to be here in the studio with you, Sarah. Our affordable energy plan.
We'll come to that in a moment. Let me just. Do you think people
and the
just
renewables
hold that?
rollout?
Let's hold. So you would be, but will you be off? But you've hit the back. Hang on.
Our affordable energy plan.
No,
but you've said we need. We are.
I asked not about
hold on and that delay. 30.
Hang on.
If I can just answer the question.
Energy prices.
This is now because I come from South Wales.
I think we should. That sounds like
the same time they promised that. Hang on.
Talking about you used to think it's just.
We believe also.
I know. Yes or no?
With respect, Sarah, if you will let me finish,
please.
The main game is how we transition.
I think it would.
Sure, you've got,
and yet that
think of the
document,
carbon footprint
that document, Susan
to import
Lee, you
LNG, and it's about the government. I'm not. That's why costs have gone up 40%. That's why Australians are struggling. That's why we.
Thank you very much for coming in.
Now, there was a lot of discussion about this in Senate estimates, and there was a bit of back and forward about was she spoken to, was she not spoken to. They weren't really clear. Hugh Marks and Justin Stevens weren't very clear. There was a concession they could have done things differently. They tried to conframe that to, well, she never comes in our program, so we had to fire a gun, which I don't think is an excuse at all. But it's not a great viewer experience when it's just the talking over.
It is just extraordinary, Jack, because this is the point. When your bias is so strong, when your bias is palpable, you can't hide it. Now, we're all for robust interviews and holding politicians to account, but we never see that from Sarah Ferguson on Labor or even Greens MPs who sit on 7:30 and make the most bizarre and wild pronouncements, but they're not challenged. But here's Susan Lee making cogent arguments, and she can't get them out because Ferguson is so abrasive about them, so offended by these statements being made. It gets even worse. I mean, we see this all the time. Constant interruption when they get Conservatives on, whereas the Labor or Greens side are just allowed to expand, even false. They can make false statements that are never challenged. After that interview, Sarah Ferguson did a fact check of the claim from Susan Lee that it's the renewables rollout that's pushing up our electricity prices. Now, that's an uncontroversial statement.
It's an indisputable fact.
Indisputable fact. But she then did a fact check which said the opposite. She fact checked it, said Sarah Ferguson, and she said it is false for Susan Lee to claim that the renewables rollout has increased prices. Now, that is the ABC using your tax dollars to produce a fact check to tell you a lie. I don't know how more badly they could breach their charter. Still no correction to that.
It's one of those things that I really do think that the average person, when you get your power bill and you look at the direction it's going, how are they going to keep saying this when you know that it's going in one direction? They can run cover for it. They can have this ideological narrative that no, it's all good. Some people talk about the messy middle, but we know that narrative's falling apart because you're going to have to constantly replace it. But to me, it looks as if the ABC is taking an editorial position on a political issue in a way that maybe a newspaper that's privately owned might campaign on an issue. And that's not their right. And the public will see that their power bills are going in the wrong direction and that the ABC is saying one thing and campaigning in another. And I think that's where the ABC is going to get into trouble the next 5-10 years, because it undermines themselves. It's not you and me pointing it out. It's them doing it.
Exactly. I think the public will be very, very angry when they realise the lies they've been told on energy. They're told them every day by Labor and Greens and Teals politicians. Remember, we were all told 4 years ago that power prices would go down $275. They've gone up by about 3 times that. So as this continues to get worse, of course, the politicians will wear a price, but the ABC will as well, because they've taken an ideological position that they create climate hysteria, and they pretend that renewable energy in Australia can change the climate, which is, of course, scientifically absurd.
When the aggregate emissions in every other country are going up because no other country is going to do it.
So it is nonsensical, but of course, and they're trying to pretend away these price increases, and they run the Labor Greens line that it's the coal-fired power stations breaking down that are pushing up prices, without ever stopping to realise that the whole renewables push is designed to put these coal-fired power stations out of business. That's why most of them are shut. It's a policy design. It's a policy aim. It's being implemented. It's an absolutely central feature. But surely people will wake up when the power problem is not fixed. Well, the ABC's been reassuring them all the time. The ABC's been holding our hand, smoothing our dying hand, as saying it's all going to be all right. And guess what? The climate's not getting any better, Sarah Ferguson, and our power bills are still going up. But she'll be saying this forever, I suppose. It's just so blatantly biased. It's like the Greens have their own television station, yet we don't have a government or a board or a chair with the intelligence and courage and integrity to do anything about it.
Well said. Chris Kenny, thank you so much for your work and your insights over this year. Please do not listen to Justin Stevens, and please keep up the good work.
Keep going, Jack. Thank you.
And joining me on the desk is a former ABC director, Joe Gersh, who's going to help us analyse the ABC's performance across all of 2025. Joe, thank you for joining us on the desk.
Oh, thank you for inviting me.
Well, you were at the ABC in a very important job for about 5 years. So you're the person to ask for a lot of these questions. I've got a big list of topics that I hope we can get through.
Let's do it.
Why don't we start with the Israeli-Hamas conflict? Do you have any general thoughts on the ABC's performance across this year covering it?
The thing which has led me to the Sky News desk on more than one occasion is the very difficult situation in which the Jewish community finds itself because of the rise of anti-Semitism in Australia. And I've often said that the way in which the ABC and the media generally, but the ABC in particular, deals with the Israel-Hamas conflict affects directly the way in which the Jewish community is treated, perceived and dealt with. And that's for that reason that I've been critical of the ABC for having been missing in action on the question of anti-Semitism. And I've noted before that there's been, here on Sky, a documentary dealing with anti-Semitism. There was a forum on anti-Semitism that was broadcast live. Most recently, The Australian has issued a book which is called A Different Country, which quotes from a Paul Kelly article in which he said, after October 7, 2023, Australia is a different country because of the way in which the Jewish community has been dealt with. Anti-Semitism has been allowed to run rampant and unchecked. And this has directly affected the nature and the quality of our social cohesion. It's actually changed the nature of Australia. And I've said before, but I'll repeat myself if you don't mind and say the reason I don't think the ABC has been part of the solution is because I believe they've been part of the problem, which relates back to what I've said about the way in which they've dealt, or the bias that has come through in the way in which they've dealt with the Israel-Hamas conflict. This is an existential issue for the Jewish community in Australia, but I think the ABC's impartiality, the ABC's reliability, is also an existential issue for them.
One of the things that I want to talk about and ask you about is Anthony Albanese was preparing to recognise Palestine as a state. Very contentious because Palestine at that point, whether you accept it's a state or not, Hamas is running it. So you've got a terrorist organisation running it. Now, I think we've got a story from the Australian to pull up here, but essentially Hamas was executing its own people, which goes to the heart of this problem with this regime, which is brutalising its own people. The ABC did not cover that story. And that, to me, goes to the heart of what you're saying about objective truths. If you think that that's not newsworthy, there's a problem. And somebody in that newsroom has surely seen the wires that have gone out. They've made a decision to not cover that story. And that, to me, shows more, it's the bias of omission as well.
Well, I think that's right. I think the critical problem for the ABC has been that many of its journalists see themselves not as objective journalists held to the standard of impartiality, which is in the ABC Charter, but as activists on behalf of a cause. And therefore, if you see yourself in that role, or frankly you don't have the depth to be able to see the issue in context, then that's the consequence if you're going to jump onto every piece of news without critically analysing it and without thinking through the consequences. Because the consequence of much of what's happened in Gaza has been the direct responsibility of Hamas, and yet the conflict is portrayed at the ABC as if it was instigated by Israel, of course, which was attacked in an unprovoked way on October the 7th.
By a terror group.
But it really does go much deeper than that, because somebody in management has to say, let's think through what the issues are here and report it in that way, including the consequences.
Well, speaking of management, Hugh Marks has just come in there. He's effectively the editor-in-chief. He was at the National Press Club and he had this to say.
We have to not cower, but we can't be defensive. When we make a mistake, own it. It's not hard. People accept this is a fast-moving world. People expect journalism operates on a very fast cycle. People are under pressure to file and get stories up, and that's what the public needs, because they need to be informed. So sometimes mistakes happen. So when mistakes happen, we acknowledge them, we own them, we make the correction, we move on. We don't defend at all costs.
Now, Joe, it's his right to defend his journalists, and in fact, it's something that he should be doing as a good editor-in-chief. To me, this suggestion that the ABC isn't defensive, and in fact, he appears to be making the point that they're doing a very good job in not being defensive, I think is quite problematic, because I think a lot of the issues with the ABC is how it deals with being called out. So not just Israel, not just the Hamas execution content, but when people say Chris Kenny calls into question editing choices in Four Corners, you'll recall that Justin Stevens and Hugh Marks were complaining to our bosses and putting that pressure on us to, I guess, make us feel as if we should be careful in calling them out and criticising them. To me, that is as defensive as it gets.
Well, I think what Hugh Marks said is absolutely correct, that the ABC should be quick to own up to its mistakes and doesn't need to be defensive. So that's a good strategy, but whether actually the reality has conformed to that strategy, certainly in the past, in my experience, the ABC was very defensive, very slow to acknowledge responsibility, defensive in many respects, and feeling themselves to be under attack when in fact all that's happening is that they're being called to account in terms of their own responsibility of impartiality. So if you ask me, is he talking about the past, or is he giving direction for the future? If he's giving direction for the future, I think that's good advice, because I do think mistakes happen and should be owned up to. I don't think that every defamation action needs necessarily to be taken through to the end, particularly when it looks as if the ABC is not going to succeed. I don't think everything that a journalist does is necessarily has to be endorsed by management. It can be pulled up, and I think the Ombudsman, of course, has a very, very important role. And to be honest, I was involved in the appointment of the Ombudsman. I think that direction to the Ombudsman would be very valuable. Not necessary to be so defensive. You don't need to find in favour of the ABC in every case. The ABC will be a better and a stronger organisation, better respected even by the people who follow its worldview, if it owns up to its mistakes.
Joe Gersh, thank you so much for your time.